What's up, guys? I tried to find a hiking trail. I went to like 3, but they're all closed. That's right, I am wearing tie-dye because I felt like it. I found a park called the Laguna Park. I think it's called the Laguna Park because there's like a bunch of water over here. And it's really pretty. I'm gonna talk to you guys today about this girl in the Bible named Esther, and she's really amazing. The Lord used her for powerful purposes to save the people of God. And there's an entire book of the Bible that's dedicated to just her and her story. Basically what happened is, like, way back in Old Testament times, a bunch of the Jews were displaced when Babylon came and took over, and it was really sad. And so Esther is a descendant of a bunch of Israelites who were displaced, and they are now in the land of Persia. And what makes Esther's story even more sad is that her parents were both dead and her uncle was raising her. So she had been orphaned at a young age. And she was in this foreign land where there wasn't anybody or not a ton of people that were like her. And the king was like a major jerk, and the whole society was a hot mess. Look at these boats behind me, guys. There's like swan boats. I think they're cool. I think I need a swan boat. So like I said, the Jewish people were in exile. They're in the land of Persia, and the king has this giant party in the first chapter of Esther. And he has this huge party with tons of money and tons of drinking, and talks about how the cups that they were drinking out of were made out of solid gold. And he just was having this party, and it went on for not 1, not 2 days, but weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. And he gets all excited one night because he's had a lot of alcohol, and he says, I want my Queen Vashti, to come and show off to everybody at the party, come and show her beauty to all the men. And she said, no, I'm not going to do that, which she should have, because that's gross. And so he was really intoxicated and really angry, and he got so mad that he essentially kicked her out of his kingdom and exiled her from the entire country. And then, you know, when he felt better the next day and he had less alcohol in his system, he was like, oh, well, bummer, now I don't have a queen. He says, I need to have a queen. So he says, gather up all of the most beautiful women in the land and spend tons of time making them as beautiful as they possibly can be, and then present them to me so I can pick my next queen. While all of this is going on, Esther is a young woman, and she is chosen, and she goes into the quote-unquote beauty parlor, and all of these treatments that they give these women to make them look as beautiful as they possibly can. She was already stunningly gorgeous, and so when they presented her to the king, he was like, this one, I pick you. The story would indicate that it wasn't really a choice for her to marry him. It's highly likely that she just had to. And she did not tell him that she was a Jew. She kept that a secret because Mordecai, her uncle who had raised her, had said, do not tell him that. Do not tell him that you are a Jew. So now I'm going to tell you about the villain of the story. Shocking. King, not the primary villain. It is this dude named Haman. And Haman is the king's like right-hand guy. The king puts Haman in charge of a ton of stuff in the kingdom. He gives him all this power, and Haman is just obsessed with his own power and his own status and people bowing down to him. So the king had given Haman the power so that whenever he walked through the streets, people had to literally bow to him. Now, Mordecai, Esther's uncle, who is also a Jew, would not do that. He would not bow to Haman. He was like, heck no, I don't do that. I only bow down to God. So Mordecai would not bow down to Haman, and this infuriated Haman so much. It made him so angry, actually, that he was ready to kill somebody. He didn't just want to kill Mordecai. He wanted to kill all of Mordecai's people. So he found out that Mordecai was a Jew, and he was like, I have to kill all the Jews. I need to commit mass genocide. He goes to the king, and he essentially talks the king in to killing all of the Jewish people, which was not a hard thing for him to do. The king was a jerk. So he talks him into signing this thing into law, which is an unchangeable law that by a certain date, all of the Jews would have to die. And he literally rolled a dice to pick the day. And so it's just in a few months from the day that they roll the dice that every single person that is an Israelite or a descendant of Israelites in the kingdom has to be murdered. They're gonna literally send soldiers out to murder every single one of them. So Mordecai hears that his entire people group is going to be slaughtered in a set number of days. Legally, they're gonna be murdered. So he goes and he mourns, and what that looks like in that culture is to put on sackcloth, which is kind of like a potato sack, and put ashes on your head and mourn in the street, cry out and beg God for mercy or for an answer or for a miracle, and to just be really sad. So Esther is heartbroken, of course, because the king doesn't know that she's a Jew, but the king is going to have her uncle, who's like her father, and all of her people murdered. So she is distressed and very upset. And she meets with Mordecai, and Mordecai essentially says to her, you have to go before the king and you have to try to talk to him. And in that country at that time, it was completely illegal for somebody to go before the king without being called before the king. It was a crime worthy of death. So the only way that your life would be spared if you went before the king without him asking you to come before him was if he held out his scepter to you as an act of mercy and saying, like, I'm not going to have her killed. So she has to essentially risk her entire life to ask for the king to not murder her people. And look how pretty it is, guys. It's so pretty. See all the boats? So Mordecai goes to Esther and he says, for if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish, because remember, they're going to kill all the Jews. And who knows whether you have not been given this royalty for such a time as this. He's basically saying, perhaps God has given you this position because this was going to happen, kind of like destiny. I think somebody forgot their fish. What is happening? Now you best believe the Lord gave Esther some super duper courage, because she said this. She said, if I perish, I perish. And she decided to go before the king and risk her life to plea for the lives of her people. So Haman is so infuriated at Mordecai as well that he puts up a 75-foot pole for Mordecai to be killed on. And that there's a plot twist to that later. I came back over to the ducks because there's too many people over there. So anyway, Mordecai advises Esther to go before the king, and when she's going, he's going to call a 3-day fast for every single Jew in the kingdom to fast and to pray, not eat any food, not drink anything for 3 days, and cry out to God to spare her life and the life of all of the Jews. So Esther goes before the king. She approaches him uncalled, unannounced in his kingdom without permission, and usually you would be killed on the spot for this. So she walks through those doors. Just imagine her heart racing, and she's knowing that she might die. It's likely she'll die. So she goes before him. Now the king is so, I don't think he was like in love with her, but he's so enamored by her beauty, and he really, really likes her. For some reason, God has given favor to Esther. The Bible says she found favor in his sight, and he holds up the golden scepter to her and basically pardons her. He says to her, what is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you, even to the half of my kingdom. He really likes her, obviously. So Esther says, if it pleases the king, let you and Haman please come to a banquet today that I have prepared for you. At the banquet, I will ask you for this request. So they go to this banquet, and of course the king is drinking wine again. After they're eating, says Esther, okay, what is your request? It will be granted to you. So Esther says this to the king. My wish and my request, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, if it pleases the king to grant my wish, let the king and Haman come again to a feast that I will prepare for them tomorrow, and then I will tell you what I want, basically is what she says. On that same night, the king could not sleep. So he ordered that his servants bring him the chronicles of the kingdom. And it was found written that Mordecai had actually saved the king's life at one point. I guess the king forgot that. He wants to honor Mordecai for this. So he calls Haman to him. Remember, Haman hates Mordecai. He's so mad at Mordecai. He wants to kill him. So he calls Haman to him and he says, what would I do for a man to honor him in this city? And Haman thinks, oh, the king is talking about me. He wants to know how I want to be honored. So Haman gives him this suggestion because he thinks the king is talking about him. For the man whom the king delights to honor, let royal robes be brought, which the king has worn, and the horse that the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal crown is set. And let robes of the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials, and let them dress the man whom the king delights to honor, and let them lead him on the horse through the city, proclaiming before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. So then, this is so ironic. The king says to Haman, great, go and do that exact thing that you just described to Mordecai. And Haman's like, why? But he has to listen to him because it's the king. I mean, so now he's just like even more angry at Mordecai. He just is like devastated. what's even more sad about this is that after Haman has to do this to honor Mordecai, he goes home and his wife totally like makes fun of him. It's like, you can't defeat Mordecai, which is true because God is on Mordecai's side. Okay, so it gets totally better now because they go to this feast that Esther has prepared for them. And this is when Esther drops like all the truth bombs, and this is when all the irony hits, like boom, like God's providence, God's sovereignty, God's justice in like the turn of a second. King, of course, is drinking wine again, so he's feeling all jolly, and he says, Queen Esther, what is it that you want? I will grant it to you. And Esther tells him about the plight of her people. Esther straight up tells the king, she's like, somebody has planned and paid for the annihilation of my people. They're coming to kill me and all of my people. The king is so angry. He says, who has planned this? Who has done this thing? And she says, this enemy, this foe, Haman, the guy that's sitting right here. Now the king is so angry. He is so mad. And when he walks out of the room for a minute, Haman is like distressed and pleading with Esther for his life. So he sits down next to her on the couch. When the king comes back, he thinks that Haman is trying to like kiss Esther or something. And so then he was like, go take him to the gallows that were prepared for Mordecai and hang him. Haman is literally executed by the king on the gallows that he built for Mordecai. How ironic is that? Okay, so now the evil villain is taken care of and Esther still has favor with the king. The problem is that there is still an edict, a public edict that the king can't undo. He can't like trash the edict that says that all of the Jews are still to die, to be murdered. So Esther goes to the king again and says, hey, we still have this problem. Can you help me fix it, please? The king can't undo the first edict, but he can write a new edict. So he says to Esther, hey, you write down exactly what you want to happen to save your people, and I will sign it, and I will put my stamp on it, and it will happen. So through the sovereignty, the protection, the favor of God, this happens. She writes it, he signs it, Mordecai distributes it. He goes out in royal robes, and he tells the people that they are saved. Then Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal robes of blue and white, with a golden crown, a robe, and fine linen of purple. And the city of Susa shouted and rejoiced. In every province and in every city where the king's command and his edict reached, there was gladness and joy among the Jews, because they were going to die and now they're not going to. And a feast and a holiday. They made it a national holiday, the day that they were saved. And many from the peoples of the country declared themselves Jews, for fear of the Jews had fallen on them. So then people in the country were like, well, I'm Jewish too. I want to be Jewish too. So instead of being outcast, they're like the favorite people now. Irony and God's providence and sovereignty, protection, favor. And Esther was a conqueror through the power of God. She went before and she was a voice for a people, even though she wasn't what was considered important, and she had been taken from her home, made to go into the king's home at a young age. She had lost her parents. You would never think she'd be the one to save an entire race, but she was. You might be asking yourself, what does this have to do with me? Because that's cool. That happened a long time ago. I don't live in Persia. I'm not in exile. I'm not about to be murdered. And you might be thinking, like, I'm not exactly sure what God is trying to tell me with this story. So there's a couple different points I want to make with this story. The first being the authority that you have as a child of God, that Jesus has chosen you and set you free and given you authority, and he is with you all the time. Just like he was with the people of God back then, he has a destiny and a plan for your life. So there is nothing that is formed against you that will stand. The Bible says that. It says there is nothing that is formed against you that will stand. The enemy can like try and try and try and try. But when you are in God, nothing formed against you will stand. Remember that you have a destiny. You are here for such a time as this. Just like Mordecai said, perhaps you are here for such a time as this. Perhaps you were made royalty for such a time as this. There's a reason that you were born into this generation, and God has a plan for your life. It's a powerful plan, and you get to decide to partner with him. Remember, we still have a choice. We talked about this a couple weeks ago, how we have free will, we have choices. We have a choice to partner with God or to not partner with him in faith and not partner with fear. I know I say this in almost every video these last few weeks, but the Bible says, I have shown you, O mortal, what is good, to love justice, to do mercy, to walk humbly with your God. To do mercy, to love justice, to walk humbly with your God. Micah 6:8. Esther saw a horrible injustice. They were going to literally murder an entire group of people, men, women, and children. And she was like, I cannot stand for this. I cannot be quiet. I cannot be silent. I have to step out in faith. I have to take a risk. I cannot partner with fear. I'm here for such a time as this. Okay, so check it out. This is your weekly challenge. Read the Bible for at least 5 minutes every day for at least a whole week. This is why. Because you have to know what the truth says in order to hold it into your heart and in order to stand on truth, like Esther stood on truth and not on fear. Read the Bible for at least 5 minutes for at least a week. You guys can do it. I believe in you. This is the weekly Bible verse, Romans 8:27. In all things, we are more than conquerors in him who loved us. In all things, we are more than conquerors in him who loved us, in Jesus. Romans 8:27. You are more than a conqueror. All right, guys, if you like this episode, go ahead and thumbs up, subscribe. We'll be back with another episode for you guys next week, of course. And I love you. I miss you so much, like crazy. I'm sending you hugs all the way around. Comment and let us know what else you'd like to see in these videos. And remember to be bold and fiercely unafraid with and in Jesus. Bye.